Hi, my name is Tom Shoemaker. I'm the watchmaking instructor at the American Watchmaking Clockmaking Institute in Harrison, Ohio. And we'd like to say thank you for attending today. We're going to try to provide some tips about battery replacement. Battery replacement, of course, it's a huge business, important business, and sometimes it can be a troublesome business. So the goal here is we can't possibly teach you everything you need to know, but it's to prevent some problems when we can, to give you some ideas and insight. Am I doing it correctly? Is there some things I need to seek out education-wise that could help our company? So we provided a little battery replacement tip guide here, and we're pretty much going to follow this directly. We're going to actually do a battery replacement on this watch, and hopefully we'll encounter some of the problems that you encounter. And so along the way, we'll do some of the standard testing that should be done. Okay. At the end, we'll take some some questions, and any comments or anything that we can help you with, we'll provide some additional information, and the tools that we're going to highlight here will be available in the back as well. We'd like to thank some of our sponsors, obviously JCK for providing this nice space, Henry Kessler, our friends at Jules Burrell, and our repair tracker software. They were nice enough to come out as well to help us out. Very good. So let's proceed. So as far as the replacement, what's unusual or different is normally you'd want to grab a knife and just take the back off. But in today's world, we need to study a little bit before we do that. We need to make sure things are good, or they even warrant taking it apart. There could be other problems. So we're going to examine the watch. And on the surface, it all looks pretty good. But if you really look close, you can see problems, such as here. This is a pre-existing scratch type thing here. And any time when you take in a watch, quite often the customer's in a hurry and they want to leave it with you. They don't remember things such as this paint missing, or possibly a piece of lint on the dial. But the thing about a take-in envelope is that most often there's no perfect watch out there. If it's being worn, it has some wear and tear on it. Even the most careful wearers, it's hard to prevent this type of thing. Also, especially with battery changing, be careful with the crystal. If the crystal's scratched, that's one thing, but if it's cracked, that's something else. There's a possibility that simply removing the back could make the scratch worse, or closing the back. It may survive coming off, but putting it on, so be aware that there's some risk involved. Also, while you're studying the watch itself, we need to find out if it's water resistant or not. If the watch is water resistant, there's a couple checks we should make, sometimes prior to even opening the back, to see if in fact it is. If we know someone is sports oriented or something, they went out of their way to mention the fact that they wear it all the time and they swim and they never take it off, that's your clue to make sure that you pre-test it maybe before you even open it up. Once you open the back, you know it changes the game a little bit. Now we're committed a little bit more than we are if we simply asked a few questions before that's open. So we study as well as maybe we'll function. So often they bring it in because they think it needs a battery, when in fact it doesn't even have a crown on it, or the stem and crown is missing. So we want to make sure that everything in fact works. The hands may not run, but if you want to just quickly check a few of the features and make sure that it's capable of running when you're completed. No use in wasting your time or opening yourself up to any kind of liability or waste of time here. if it could be headed off in advance. So we've observed the rating, 3 atmospheres. An atmosphere is about 33 feet. Atmosphere and bar, the term bar interchange. So 1 atmosphere equals 1 bar, that's 33 feet. So basically here we have a watch that's water resistant to 100 feet. So the next question out of your customer's mouth is, can I swim with it? And the answer is no. Even though at 100 feet, you would think that would be very water resistant. When you start actually swimming and the watch is moving in the water, because this is actually a static type rating, the action of the water against the watch, it would have to be at least 5 bars. You have to add 2 more bars. So if anyone asks you with a general water resistance, and if it's not marked with 3, it's generally considered 3 or less. If it says water resistant but it's not marked with the exact thing, it's usually, but that's not true of higher grade watches. Some of the better watches don't have as much insignia on them as well, so be careful. We're talking about a general grade watch here. A general rule of thumb is if it's water resistant when it comes in, it needs to be water resistant when it goes out. And that's your protection, that's for your benefit as well. We're going to observe the brand of this watch because we probably don't recognize ETA Swiss quartz, but those are the manufacturers that make these movements that are in a lot of watches. Today, Ronda is doing a lot of quartz watches in the fact that ETA has cut back a little bit on what they produce. So the Ronda movements can be found in Cartier and Tag and so forth. And Ronda is very user-friendly in their quartz information. You can go online for free at ronda.ch and you can find all kinds of technical information out about Ronda, all their catalogs and so forth. So they're kind of stepping into this big time. You'll see it in a lot of brand watches. So we want to observe the brand because it's very important. Certain brands, we have to be very careful. The factory dictates an after-sale service, how they're to be handled. Tag Heuer, for instance. There is no such thing as a simple battery replacement. It's basic service. Basic service includes checking of the movement parameters, all the parameters on a diagnostic machine. It involves taking the case apart completely, replacing all the gaskets, including the crystal gasket, the crown gasket, the back gasket, and usually new spring bars. We clean the case. We don't polish and refinish it. That's expensive. That takes time to do that correctly. A lot of changing of wheels and taping off with those type of finishes, a lot of sandblasting type things. So we clean the case. We assemble with new gaskets. We've checked the movement. Now it gets a fresh cell, and we check the water resistancy. We set the watch, and we quality control it for a day or so. It's hard to do that type of watch while a customer waits. It's often done in a day or two to ensure the quality of the repair. And by doing that, 2 things happen. One, it's not a $10 battery exchange. You need to get paid for that. And quite often the suggested retail of something like that is between $75 and $100. The other thing is because you've done it the correct way, you're ensuring the quality. Now you can guarantee the watch repair. You can guarantee that the battery will last a year. You can guarantee that in fact the watch is water resistant. Be careful of other brands that have different kind of requirements. You may not have the tools to open the back. There's all kinds. We're familiar maybe with the Tissot rock watch, where you know, in order to take the movement out of the case, the crystal has to be blown out. There's all kinds of tricky things out there. Some movements, even quartz movements, the movement comes out through the crystal and it has no back. So let's be smart about it. Let's understand what we're getting into before we do it, and that limits our liability. Quite often, you know, it's just one battery, and we do a lot of batteries. Sometimes it's easier to take a pass, and often the customer's happier if we don't damage their watch as well. So we observe the brand to make sure it's something we can deal with. And then quite often we would do a water resistance test before we even open it. And in battery exchanging, a lot of battery replacement, it's a good idea to have a dry tester. If you have a watchmaker on staff, now we can have the wet. Now we understand how the equipment works. But at least with the dry tester, you have a very limited risk. There's still a risk, though, because it can, in fact, if there's a gross leak here, the crystal can pop out. And so then you have to have the capability of putting that together. But no damage to the movement, usually at all. So we're going to run a quick test just to verify. A lot of the waterproof testing equipment today has preset programs. This one's called the SAFE program. It's considered just general water resistant, where it does a small vacuum test and then a small pressure test. Okay, let's see. Okay. This is great. This is great because of a couple things. We can hook up a printer to this machine, and now if there's an issue before we ever open it up, I can bring the receipt out and say, "Ooh, Mr. Smith, your watch isn't sealed up right now. Would you like me to continue on?" And then you can maybe promote and sell a service. Yes, we have the capability of resealing it. Or he may say, "No, you know, this is just a backup while they're fixing my other watch. I'd really just like a battery." Okay, we'd just like to let you know that, you know, it's not water resistant. Now be a little bit careful with that. When we put it back together, we'll check it again, but chances are we'll have the same result. Okay, so in fact, it did pass the vacuum test, but it failed the pressure test. And this is not unusual. Quite often, and a quick little scenario of what this means is this. Quite often, we'll have a person that swims with a watch. The watch is watertight. He swims, no problem. No moisture, no condensation. However, they'll mow the grass, and they'll come in the air conditioning, and the watch fogs up. How can that be? Well, when we go underwater, pressure is different. Pressure causes the gaskets to swell. It'll actually seal the watch. Vacuum is different. If you have a vacuum leak, what happens is subtle changes in temperature from outside. It's awfully warm out here in Las Vegas, right? To this nice air in here. If there's a vacuum leak, you can get a small amount of condensation will form inside your watch. That's a sign of a vacuum leak. A vacuum test tells us about the positioning of the gaskets and how well the gaskets fit. But when it's done, the machine does not alter the size of the gasket. So it's a very critical test. Quite often, it's a more important test than pressure. Very few people dive to 200, 300 feet of water, but everybody does their daily chores and so forth. And another hint about the vacuum, if you look at the markers when we did an examination, if you see dark and luminous material, it usually means it has a vacuum leak. It gets a small amount of condensation in. You may not even notice it. They may not notice it. But as that process repeats, it darkens the luminous material. So especially on divers' watches or heavy sports-oriented watches, great idea if it has luminous material to take a look. If it's darkened up, there could be a chance that at one time it had a vacuum leak if it doesn't already. Okay. So we made our pre-test here, and we're going to continue on. And what's a little bit different is we have some new tools to open backs with. And that's a godsend to some people because it can be tricky at times at best. We have the typical case knife with a polished blade, and in a lot of cases we can pry against a lug and lift that off. But we need to be careful. One thing we should do, and one tip later on in the book, is we'll say you really shouldn't do this in front of the customer, right? They treasure this piece in a lot of cases, and here we are prying or fumbling with it, and they don't always come off easily. This particular watch has a lip around all the way around the edge, so there's a different type of tool we're going to use here. This is available through Burrell. Kasker, these companies. And this was a very expensive tool at one time. I just found out pleasantly yesterday that you can buy this for about $75, $50, $60, something in that range. It used to be $175. I would pay $300 for this tool. It doesn't work on every case, but it makes a very easy job out of this. So here we go. What's new is we're using a piece of plastic or the cling wrap, maybe that you wrap your watches in. We want to prevent any scratches, and this shows respect for the watch, especially if the customer can see you and so forth. And this is a very simple tool. You simply push it in and leverage it up. No scratching. Okay. This has a red hard back gasket with it. Some are O-rings and so forth. We've all seen this type. If it comes apart, there's a way to identify the direction. It's always curved a little bit, how it's going to enter the case. And this type of gasket never goes in this direction and then press the back on. This gets applied to the back and then pressed on, just in case you weren't sure how that system worked. Those gaskets are in fact available through a supplier in a generic type assortment. However, they're a little bit tricky, to be honest with you. There's a little bit of measurement involved to get the correct one. Okay. Going back to our booklet a little bit, we would have removed any foreign debris before we open the back. Very important. Maybe a stiff brush or so forth. In some cases, if we've checked water resistant, in fact we know it's water resistant, we may actually decide to use a little toothbrush and do a little scrubbing. Once in a while, we get some watches that have, to kindly say, a little debris on them, right? And not always so pleasant there. And the idea is we never want to open and let any debris fall into the movement. Some watches have a limiting spring on the battery themselves. And in sports watches, a lot of cases, they'll have these thinner movements, but the case will be relatively thick. If possible, study the orientation of the spring before you remove that. The purpose of that is simply to keep the battery in place in the event of a shock. It's no electrical contact or anything of that sort. This one does not have one. When you look at battery sizes, 371, a thicker version would be the 395, for example. When it comes to batteries, that would be the same voltage. However, think of it as a gas tank. The thinner battery, it's meant for this style watch. It just has a little bit smaller gas tank. It supplies the same type of energy needed to run the watch, but it doesn't run quite as long. So thicker cases generally provide for a larger battery to allow for a longer run time. But it works in the opposite as well. With a lady's watch, the smaller the battery, the expected length of time it should run is expected to be less. The tank is smaller there. We're going to remove the battery. It's tempting just to use tweezers and pop it out, and you can. What you want to avoid doing is touching both sides at one time. So we can make it loose, maybe with our tweezers here. But if we're going to handle the battery, they do make plastic tweezers that allows us to handle the battery. Okay. We need to identify the battery to make sure that we have the conversion. And I know upstairs in another department with technology and tools, our friends from Renault are up there. They have cross-reference charts and some free literature there you can take advantage of when it comes to being able to size up all the different reference numbers. Now, this was a handy little tool that was available for a while. This one allows us to test the battery by using a light. And so if it lights up, it's set for 1.5 volts. We know the battery's good. So this is a very quick indicator. But we also have great testing equipment available to us. You don't have to buy the state-of-the-art machine just to test batteries, but we do have another one here that's very simple. That allows us a quick test to confirm that it's good or not. What is good? Well, it should be at least 1.5 volts. It's supposed to be 1.55, but it could go down to 1.5 and still be considered good. Anything below 1.5, the battery is considered bad or on its way out. What's very interesting about this particular watch, this particular circuitry, which is in a lot of watches, this has an indicator on it that tells the customer when the battery is going bad. So when it reaches the critical voltage of around 1.35 volts, the second hand will pause briefly for 4 seconds and then run rapidly for 4 seconds. We've all seen that type of warning. When a customer calls you and asks you about that, you generally, the advice we normally give that we've learned from manufacturers is they generally have about a month. It'll run for about a month under that condition, continue to keep time during that month to be able to get their cell replaced. So we identified what kind of battery it takes. This is correct. Dating helps. If there's ever an opportunity to put a small date onto the battery, it's very helpful for the next time you change it. Or the first time you change it, you scratch a little date. The battery itself are made out of nickel. It's very easy to scratch. You don't have to engrave it, just a small little indicator of a date. This is very useful in the fact that if the watch would ever come back, it gives you an idea of how long the battery has been in place. Is there another problem with the watch? We know it should last a minimum of a year with any kind of quality watch at all, preferably longer, 2 to 3 years in a model like this with this type of battery. So if we hear something, comment like, I just had a battery change my watch 3 months ago and it must have been a cheap battery, it didn't last. Most oftenly, that's not the case. It's not the battery, it's probably the mechanism. If you had a watchmaker, we could go on to diagnostics and test the parameters of the watch, but in general, type battery replacement, we may not have that option, but we don't always need that option. So if in fact the battery would check good, we would stop. There's no use in putting another battery in. It isn't going to change the result. If the watch isn't running with a good battery, another good battery isn't going to change that. So we would refer that on to a watch maker, a professional watchmaker. If the battery checks low, however, we would in fact replace the battery and we would take a look to make sure that it runs. However, to flip it over, we need to be careful because there's parts that can fall out. So one way to do it, and you notice this watch is on a casing cushion. This is very inexpensive. This shows respect for the watch as well, but this allows us to do something like this. Flip the cushion over, put the watch together, and now we can tell if in fact the watch is running with the new battery in place. No parts to be lost. Okay, so we're going to install the battery, check it out. There's other tools that can aid in handling a battery. One is a leather buff stick. This will give you an opportunity to not only press down lightly, the key word, also in the event that you would accidentally smudge the battery, that area can be cleaned up. But more importantly, all the screws on a quartz watch usually form some type of electrical connection. So when we actually clean a quartz watch, we clean the screws as well. That's very important. If this screw is loose, or this screw is loose in this particular watch, which you can see we replaced the battery, they never had to be loosened, it'll in fact stop the watch. So if a watch is stopped, sometimes it's a good idea to tighten the screws or to check the screws. Maybe somebody before made that a little bit too loose. However, here's where the buff stick comes in very handy. That coil is a very dangerous item, and if that's broken, the watch won't run. So we can lightly place this over and protect it while we're in fact tightening or loosening a screw. You don't have to push down with much might, but this one in fact is a safe way to check or tighten our screws. Or if you had a cell strap that involved changing, a simple $10 leather stick also has a cover with it to allow you to keep it clean and so forth. It comes in very handy. Good idea to date the battery. Simple date would be good. We're at 6 of 12. I don't have to, I can put my initials on it or the store's initials, but just something simple here will give us a good idea, because the customer's memory isn't always too accurate. As you may know, the customer may always be right, but their memory isn't that good. So it really helps us. We do this for us. People love it when you say, you know, gosh, you got 5 years out of the battery. And quite often they say, oh, it just seems like a year ago, you know, I had that changed, and so forth. So it's always preferred that you go ahead and check it out on any instrumentation you have, but we can often just check to make sure it's running. Quite often, it's a simple job, and we're good to go. Do not handle the battery with your fingers. Very important. Your fingers have acid, sweat, perspiration, and it can affect the contacts of the battery, shorten the life, and affect the contacts of the watch. If, when you removed the battery, you noticed a leaking battery, that's not a good thing. The salts from the chemicals of the battery can get inside the movement and stop the watch. However, quite often the damage could be contained to a small area. You may be able to blow that out and slightly clean the contact area. A good tool to use for cleaning the contact area is an eraser, like a typing eraser, for use older ones in the crowd. Who knows what a typewriter was, right? And these are still available. And you can slightly rub the contacts, and this will clean it. Be careful though. If you notice that the gold plating, for instance, is worn off the contact, the circuit is bad. The circuit should be replaced. That gold plating is very important for the proper contact. So any bubbling, or if it's eaten into a contact to that degree, you wipe it and the plating comes off, it really is in need of more repair. The battery will not last as long, and will actually do some shorting out and arcing at that point. Okay, so try not to touch it with your fingers at all. Verify that it's running. We dated the battery. Install that pesky cell strap if necessary. Quite often the cell strap could be an electrical connection, so therefore it's important that the screws be tight. But quite often it simply holds the battery in, and the connection is to the side of the battery, like this, and underneath the battery. So if this would have a cell strap, it would be simply to hold the battery in place, no electrical connection. Quite often, the movement is a positive ground system. So the side of this, anywhere the writing is on a watch, there's always exceptions. There's one exception I can think of, but usually 99% of the time, if wherever the writing is the positive side of the battery. Good idea to check the positioning of the gasket to make sure we didn't upset anything there. The condition of the gasket, it's a great time to look at that and inspect. And if you have the capability of replacing that, it's always a good idea. Align the back. And next year, hopefully we'll be invited back out. We need to do a program on use of a case press, because that's so important. A lot of damage can be done there. It's not as hard a tool to master as you might believe. It looks a little bit intimidating, has a much force, something you have to be very careful of. I didn't bring one with me. We're simply going to snap this one back on. This gives us an opportunity to make sure everything is functioning, that the AM and PM is working for a customer. It's kind of amazing how the calendar flipping at noon is very confusing to the customer, but it can be. All right. We see everything's working, everything looks good. We would proceed by doing a small quality control, making sure that the back is snapped all the way on, making sure the hands are set correctly. This is a little irritating to the customer, and I did this on purpose for our quality control seminar to come up later. When the hand doesn't line up exactly on the markers, it kind of bugs people. So this is some of the things we look at. We make sure the crown is in. If it's a screw-down crown, it's a good idea to do that for them. If you ever hand a watch to a customer and they have trouble working the crown, it's a good idea to make sure that you go over that with them before they leave the store to build their confidence on how that works. Otherwise, they're going to quickly do it, possibly not seat correctly, and then when they get into the water, it would present a problem. So it's good insurance for you. We would, in fact, do a additional water resistance test and confirm that it's water resistant if it was before, and then you could possibly scrub it off. Maybe you want to grab a toothbrush, little light scrubbing, nothing wrong. You can do a little rinsing there. Be careful with the force of the water. It's not necessary, but can be done. What you don't want to do and refrain from doing is putting the watch in its entirety into the ultrasonic tank. And people do this, and it's a little bit risky. Also, we need to be aware in this situation we have painted markers. So sometimes the best intentions, cleaning it up a little bit, brightening up a little bit, can cause us a lot of problems. So you need to be aware of what you're dealing with at all times. If you have something in a condition that's a little bit frail and so forth, you may want to just take the pass there. Maybe they're the type of customer that's not concerned. It's just all about the time. We like to do things. We like to please our customers. That's why they come to us and so forth. But sometimes it's better just to leave it go. Okay. Referring to the manual a little bit here, some tips. One thing is quite often, especially if you're doing testing of a quartz watch, quite often when the battery dies, it'll die around noon or midnight, around 12 o'clock, I should say. That's not by accident. It's because it takes more energy to flip the calendar. And if the battery is really low, when it gets to the point where it requires more energy, that's when, in fact, when it goes bad. And it's more of a tip for the watchmaker because we forget to look at the other side of the watch. So now when we do the testing, the numbers appear artificially high. We may think the watch is dirty. All we have to do is get the calendar through the flip, and it's back to normal. So if you're of that capability, bear that in mind. So quite often a calendar watch will go dead around midnight. Beware of the brands that could cause you some difficulty, that you have trouble getting parts for, or gaskets. If it says water resistant, it should leave water resistant. Very important. You know, the lifestyles we have today, people don't think twice about putting their watch on and being active and so forth, and they're kind of spoiled compared to years ago when it comes to that. And that's good for us. This next one, number 4, is very important. And this one usually I get people to raise their eyebrows a little bit. But you're the expert, not the customer. And there comes a time when you have to look them in the eyes and you have to say, I'm sorry, we have a policy. If it's water resistant, it has to leave water resistant. Or I cannot change the battery in that Rolex watch because I don't have the proper equipment. Sometimes they respect you for telling them that. Sometimes this is what they're looking to hear. Also, customers are pretty savvy. In the case of, say, a tag, very sports-oriented watch, Generally speaking, $75 to $100 to change the battery, the gaskets, to test the watch and so forth. Sometimes you can insult the customer inadvertently by saying, yeah, I can change that. That's simple. That's $10. Same as the others. They're expecting more. They know that watch is special to them and has a little bit different characteristics than just any watch. So be careful, because people are aware. They know what this stuff costs to have done. And with the internet and the searches, they know quite a bit, actually. Avoid giving multi-battery discounts. The only thing about multi-batteries, it's great when they bring some things in and you're helping them out and so forth. But you have the same risk, if not more, when you do 10 of their watches at a time. 8 may go flawlessly, but you may have that one that you're only getting $4 for or whatever, since you're doing so many, that leaks or the hand falls off or so forth. And now everything you've done is kind of negated when it comes to that. We have a temptation. It's simple, though everything will go well. But we even need to put each one of those in their own job envelopes. And the more watches they have, the less of a memory they have of how many they brought in and so forth. So be a little bit careful with this multi-battery discount. When you have a lot of them, it's best to take them in. If there's one they need right away to wear, let's do that one. Come back tomorrow. I'll have the rest of them for you. And take the time, a few minutes, to sort them out and go from there. We do have some jewelry stores that offer free batteries. They do these loss leaders. They do these incentives. There's nothing wrong with that. We have one company in North Carolina, the Watchmaker, comes for training quite often, and his company donates. The batteries are free, but if the customer wants to donate money, they give it to charity. It gets wonderful PR from it. The problem is that they have the risk of the watch. You still have to repair it the same way, whether you charge or not. You have to make sure that the watch is water resistant. You have to make sure that the battery is put in correctly. You cannot scratch their watch whether you're charging them or not. That makes no difference. So it's still to be handled the same way. But it costs you real money when something goes bad there. So that free battery can cost you dearly when you do something you're not supposed to do, or something bad happens. Even if you comp a repair, and this is good advice, whether it be prongs or whatever, if somebody buys a nice expensive piece, because jewelry stores, it's sales. We think of repair now as sales as well. But even if you comp a repair, you should tell them what the value is. Sometimes they lose the appreciation for what you do for them, and some, quite often, it's not as easy as it looks. There's a lot of steps and a lot of risk involved with things. So it's a good idea to say, Mr. Smith, we appreciate your business and so forth. Since you bought that nice piece for your wife, we want to give you this battery. Normally it's about $10 or $15, but it's on us today. Thanks for coming in. So that's a great idea, because if we just do it for free, they take it for granted that doesn't have much value, and that's not what we want. Each watch we talked about should have its own envelope. Be careful, you shouldn't really polish anything with the movements inside. Static electricity can cause a circuit to blow. Years ago they were more fragile than today. But in Switzerland, when they work on electronic things, the watchmaker often is tethered with a ground strap to prevent static electricity from blowing these circuits up. Avoid opening watches with cracked crystals. That's dangerous. You need to deal with that issue of the crystal first before you open it up. Even if you think you can do it, you're doing them a favor, there's risk involved there. So make sure everybody's perfectly clear on how that's going to be handled in the event that breaks. And the general rule of thumb is this: if it's chipped, the crystal's chipped, it's an option. If it's cracked, it's an overhaul. That's the way it's handled. Especially with sapphire crystals, the way a sapphire crystal breaks, it produces a lot of small shards of glass that get everywhere in that watch. And whether it be in the calendar or down deeper into the movement, it will eventually cause a problem. So the problem is you're trying to do them a favor, but it could cost you dearly in a couple months. that $10 battery could result in a $100 overhaul or cost you. Avoid working at the counter unless this is the only place you have in their site, unless you're very professional and know what you're doing. And even the best of us can get a little bit nervous, right? I'm a little nervous, right? I'm not the best. But it's great to maybe see the customer, but they don't need to be looking over your shoulders when you're doing opening the case, especially if it's particularly difficult to open and so forth. Keep records. Very important to keep records. Even the smallest things, good idea. But on the flip side of things, send the customer a reminder. It's part of today's world. We send reminders. Did you know it's been a year since you've had your battery changed? You wouldn't want that to leak. Leaking causes damage. That's expensive. Battery's only $10. I'll be glad to do it any time. Come in, no appointment needed. So sometimes these reminders are a good thing. People get a lot of stuff in the mail, maybe email, maybe you have other arrangements there, but that can come in pretty handy as a sales tool. Echo Drive. What is Echo Drive? Echo is the Citizen version, and it's a solar-powered type watch. It has a rechargeable capacitor, a rechargeable battery, where the sunlight to the dial is accumulated into this, and it runs like a regular quartz watch. But the accumulator, the capacitor, the rechargeable battery, whatever you like to call it, is much more difficult to replace. There's contacts that are connected to that type of unit, and they have to be placed in there very carefully, and those cannot be shorted out. If you touch the wrong contact with the side of that capacitor, you will in fact short that capacitor out, and it either will not work or it will shorten the life critically. As far as a kinetic, this is a Seiko version, and this moves similar to the movement of your wrist. It causes a pendulum type weight to swing. When it swings, it has a magnet connected to the motor, and it makes its own generating field, and it produces this electronic charge that is stored up into another type of capacitor, and the watch runs off of that. There again, when those first came out, the typical run time power reserve was around 2 days. Now it's up to 10 days. Some models even say they have a 100-day power reserve. A basic service we kind of described here includes all the steps that we've done, but in addition to that, we would make the checks on the proper diagnosing equipment. We would completely disassemble the bracelet, clean it, install the new gaskets, water control it, quality control it, and guarantee it. So my friends, basically, watch servicing, battery replacement is a big business. There's a lot to know. I could be here all weekend and not show you everything you need to know. It's just a few tips in addition to what you already know, and as things progress, we'd like to put a program together to help you along the way. If you need anything, please contact me at the Institute. I'll be more than happy to help you. On the older watches, the early quartz watches, if you pulled the crown out, in fact, the battery would go dead much quicker. It actually was a blocking mechanism, and it would go dead quicker. So the new ones, that's true. It does work. But really, the best advice is to leave it run. It's better for the oils in the watch. Batteries are fairly inexpensive. There's no setting of the hands backwards and the confusion with the calendar and so forth. But people will do what they do, you know. But they are right. Today, it does save battery. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Sometimes the customer's question was, you know, sometimes he's observed that when they unscrew a crown, they go to pull out the stem, and it comes out, So this is one of our second steps, was to kind of examine the watch and function the watch just a little bit while you're in front of them, because then it's a little bit tougher for them to look you in the eye and say, well, you broke my watch. Well, all I did was do this. So that's a great idea to maybe in special cases like that. I mean, it does happen. The second question was, can I date a battery with a Sharpie marker? Our friends at Rolex actually used to, instead of scratching in the back of the watch, used a permanent marker. But they found out that the fumes from the ink affected the oil, so they don't do it no more. They scratch again. Is that really that big a factor? Probably for you, probably not. It probably would be okay. A small scratch, they say not to scratch them either, but a small scratch, it's okay too. Just you don't have to embed it tremendously. As far as the price of some of this testing equipment, unfortunately, a good waterproof tester is around $4,000 or $5,000. The good news is that quite often that price is discouraging at first, but we have customers that make $3,000 a month by offering to their customers at $25 every time they test one. And we're not talking the highest brands. We're talking about general water-resistant watches. Oh, do you swim in that? Would you like it verified? Can we verify? Can we test that for you and correct that? And it's a big sales tool. I was talking to our friends from Burrell, and they said, listen, we've had people that pay for that machine in a month or two, and now they have it for years, and every month they do that. So if you do a tremendous volume of batteries, it'll easily pay for itself. The up front is a little scary. It's Swiss. They don't sell that many of them, right? It's a very unique product, but it's very accurate. It's very nice. Yes, ma'am.
So a tester, you test the battery by just playing the watch?
Yes. What that type of tester won't tell you the voltage, but it blinks. It'll give you a light. And the light basically tells you that there's magnetism. In a quartz watch, there has to be magnetism in order for it to run. So it's telling you that it should be capable of running. The battery should be good if it lights the light. But just like everything you know about watch repair, nothing's 100%. There's so many exceptions to everything. You're more than welcome to hang out. We can talk more about this. We have some tools in the back. We can show anything we can do this weekend to help you, whether it be now or later. You come back and we'll talk about whatever you like to talk about. Yes.
You were talking about the second hand being not on.
Yes.
Is there anything that we can do?
There is something you can do. We talked about, the question was the second hand. Sometimes the second hand can be exactly on the indices before you change the battery. It is possible that simply by releasing that voltage and putting a new one in, it can cause the hand. We didn't think it could happen, but it does happen. It can cause the hand to get off slightly. And that is a very difficult situation. Even when we're assembling watches, we have to be aware of that too ourselves when we're rebuilding these. And that's a problem because the customer notices right away. So what you may be able to do there is to pull the stem out in position 3 and stop the hand, remove the battery for maybe 30 seconds or so, make sure all the leftover energy is gone, and reinstall it, and then push the crown in. You can alter it just a little bit. Doesn't, when you need to do it the most and you're in a hurry and you're nervous, it's difficult. But I just wanted you to know there is that effect both ways. It's not your imagination. It does happen once in a while. Not quite as severe as what you're seeing here most of the time. But by simply changing the battery, it could change that. And customers, they notice those things, Yes, ma'am.
And if they have like a chronograph or a stopwatch,
Yes.
they get a lot of lights and they say it's not reminding them.
Yes.
And the battery doesn't cause that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct. The quartz chronograph, and I do have one with me, is notorious. When we do the training on this watch, it's different than any other chronograph in that the other chronographs have a brake that holds all the hands. On a quartz watch, it has no brake. It's all done electronically. So when we look here, Here it goes here, and when we reset it, that's right on the money. That's right in line with the other hand. We'll do it again. Slightly to the left. Slightly. And I could do it again, and it could change again a little bit. And it's not you. There is nothing you can do, unfortunately. The big thing about a chronograph watch, though, it's great when you reset it for the customer because most of the time they don't have a clue. It's very important on a quartz chronograph because as this thing runs, it may not hit on the markers quite exactly, but it's so important that when it's in reset, everything is lined up the best it can be. That's where you start from. But there's a little bit of compromise due to the quality of the dials and so forth. So it sounds so easy, but there is more to it than most people think. So the more you're aware of it and the calmer you can stay, you got to get the emotion out of it, right? It's just business. And at the end of the day, it's not worth fighting about. Just get it taken care of the best you can. Yeah. But this is why you charge for your services, right? Yeah. Also, we'd like to remind you if there's anything here that resonates with you or maybe something I talked about too quickly, we're selling a little DVD. Not that we're big into sales. We do this as a service to you in the event that this may help you, or maybe it's a training tool to help your staff or whatever. So those are being done as we speak, and those will be available in the next half hour. We also, if you missed a presentation from yesterday, we have those as well, and we're going to continue with all our presentations this weekend. Just trying something new to see if it would help the retail jewelers. Yes?
Tom, Jim wanted me, if anybody has questions about watchmakers.
Yes.
Employing watchmakers, I'll be glad to stay around and talk to them.
Very good. We have a gentleman, if you're interested in finding out the ins and outs of watchmaking or the benefits, we have one that's going to give us a little testimonial. So feel free to talk with him. We really appreciate your time. I hope this is helpful for you. Thank you.